So first of all, I'm going to apologize for the way I'm dressed. Keep in mind, Tommy and I live 8,500 foot level in the Rocky Mountains. It's the middle of February, and it is cold out there. And if I get a little excited tonight, I apologize too, because I'm an old man. I get tired easy. So we did a little coke before we got this going. So I'm just kidding about that. Or am I? So I wanted to get into the catastrophe itself this time around, and the reason is we had done a video before the first episode in which we covered that, and I thought that was going to be put in the first episode. So I've had a couple viewers ask me about the catastrophe. It's what catastrophe are we talking about? So that's what I want to cover tonight. I apologize, my voice is going to get raspy, so beer is good medicine. So what we're talking about is we're talking about an event on Earth that is cyclical, that appears, according to the science that is coming out, to be happening about every 12,000 years. And we see that in a number of different sciences, as we mentioned before. In particular, geology, archaeology, entomology, all kinds of different sciences, and we'll get into that a lot deeper later on. Right now, I just want to give you an overview of what we're talking about. That cyclical event every 12,000 years is basically this. The sun novas. And when the sun novas, the rotation of the Earth, which is directly related to the magnetosphere of both the Earth and the sun, stops or shifts. There's two different lines of thinking on this right now. But in either case, when that happens, it is catastrophic. It literally erases every bit of history and technology that man has produced over the previous 12,000 years. And again, looking at the sciences, we see that this happens on a cyclical basis, meaning that it happens over and over and over again. And that's why we're finding these archaeological places, historical places that date back to 12,000, 24,000, 36,000. We're seeing a lot of geological events that fall within those 12,000 time periods as well as astrophysics. We're seeing this. And so I wanted to run you through that cataclysm so that you'll have an understanding of what takes place and the duration of which it takes place. Again, what we're talking about is we're talking about an event, whether it is a nova or a solar flare. We tend to think that it's a nova because it would be all-encompassing throughout the galaxy, rather than a happen chance solar flare pointed towards the Earth. If that was the case, where it was just a flare pointed towards the Earth, it wouldn't happen every 12,000 years. The coincidence of that would just be too great. So we believe that it is a nova, that our sun is a repeating nova. And if you look up on the internet, you'll find all kinds of information on repeating novas. They're all over the place. So during that time, what happens is the sun novas, but unlike what we were taught, decades ago, when a star novas, it destroys itself or becomes a black hole. That evidently is not the case, because we are seeing repeating novas where the same star novas over and over and over again. Sometimes it's decades, sometimes it's hundreds of years, and like clockwork, you can look at that star on a cyclical basis and you can watch it do it over and over again. But when that happens, what is taking place is because the sun's magnetosphere and the Earth's magnetosphere are so intricately entwined with one another that it sets off a series of events. Now we know, and many people know, this is just rampant, we know this all over the place, that the magnetosphere of the Earth is weakening. It's weakened by about 80% right now. And we know that when the magnetosphere is directly related to the rotation of the Earth. And we know that when a solar flare happens, when there's an electromagnetic storm from the sun, it affects the magnetosphere of the Earth. You can watch all kinds of videos, again, on the internet, on the science on this, and you can see how as the solar flares get close to the Earth, the solar winds get close to the Earth, it moves our magnetosphere, almost to the point to where the sun-facing side of the Earth, the magnetosphere looks like it's squashed right up against the Earth, while the back side of it is trailing. We know that the magnetosphere is directly related to the rotation of the Earth, and it actually affects the amount of time that the Earth rotates in a day. It's not always an exact 24-hour period. In fact, the atomic clock, which we've all become reliant upon, because now our phones are connected to it, all our computers are connected to it, and you can go buy an atomic clock anywhere, and it will keep, time. You don't have to change it constantly. But what you may not know is that they have had to change the atomic clock repeatedly since they put it into mass production. That is directly related to the magnetosphere. As the rotation of the Earth changes, they have to update that, just the same way that they have to update magnetic north on a regular basis. Normally it's a 5-year period where they go out and they find out where the exact magnetic north is, as opposed to the geologic north, and they will change that information every 5 years. Last time that they did it, which was just last month I believe, in January, it could have been December of 2019, they had to change it after only 3 years. And that tells us that magnetic north is moving a lot faster than we had anticipated. So, after the sun's nova directly affects the Earth's magnetosphere, that means that the rotation of the Earth can come to a stop, or it can slow way down, or it can shift so that the Earth is no longer rotating from west to east. I say west to east because remember the sun goes east to west, so the Earth is rotating west to east at about 1,000 miles an hour. But what if all of a sudden the electromagnetic core in the middle of the Earth shifted, and now the Earth was starting to rotate north to south? Then whichever way this would happen, it would have dramatic effects on the Earth. As an example, the stopping of the rotation of the Earth means that, as if you're looking at a globe, it would come to a stop or it would shift. But there's two things that we have to worry about. One of them is that the oceans and the wind currents aren't directly connected to the Earth. They're just going to keep going. So while the continental plates would stop or shift, those oceans and those wind currents are just going to keep on going. Probably not at 1,000 miles per hour. There is one study, and we'll get into that as we look into the proofs of these things later, that said it could be 700 to 1,000 miles per hour. But what if it's only 300 or 400? miles per hour. Can you imagine what kind of catastrophic effects that would have on the Earth when that happens? The other thing that we have to worry about is the continental plates, because the tectonic plates on the Earth are sitting right on the lithosphere. It's just the crust of the Earth, which is, maybe 70 miles deep. But as compared to the entire Earth as a whole, going from the core to the mantle to the crust, it's just like a piece of paper. And that piece of paper is broken up into different sections. They're all free floating on top of the mantle. So again, when you talk about a rotation, which is directly related to the rotation of the core of the Earth, if it should shift or stop, those continental plates are going to continue to move. Just as, eggshells floating in a bowl of water, they're just going to keep moving. And when that happens, again, you can imagine the catastrophic events that are going to take place when that happens. Okay, so now we're talking about that break in the electromagnetic current between the sun and the Earth, talking about a slowing down, a shifting, or a stopping of the rotation of the Earth. Okay, so now think of it this way. Let's say the United States is facing the sun when that slow down of the rotation or the stopping of the rotation occurs. Well, how long is it going to take for it to start spinning again? An hour? 7 hours? A day? Maybe even longer, as if it comes to a slow down over a period of time. Or if it stops, how long is it going to take for the Earth to start rotating again? Whatever side is facing the sun is going to get burnt to a crisp. All living things, all trees, they're just going to fry. And as one historical record from Siberia, they said that, and we're talking ancient history, they said it looked like the Earth was on fire from horizon to horizon. This is how big of a problem we're talking about here. Okay, and that's on land. What about the oceans? And all the lakes and the rivers and the streams? As it takes a while for the Earth to start rotating again, and as it's facing towards the sun, literally all that water is going to evaporate. Now it's going to do two things. One, it's going to put all that moisture up into the air, along with all the heat, all the BTUs that it took to get it up in there. On the other hand, you take a look at the globe and look at any map, you notice all the oceans are connected to each other. So not only are you going to have all this evaporation take place, you're also going to have a huge displacement of water as the rest of the oceans try to fill in that gap. Let's hope it's only a short period of time. But evidence shows that during the times at the start of ice ages, that there is a lot of carbon dioxide, right there at the start of those ice ages. Well, I mean, if a third of the Earth is facing the sun, catches on fire, that's going to put a whole lot of carbon into the air. Okay, and so as the Earth starts rotating again, and the other side of the Earth, of course, is going through the opposite effect where it's freezing. While one side of the Earth is burning, the other side is freezing because it doesn't have the sun for that period of time. And all that moisture in the air is just going to travel along with the solar winds to the backside of the Earth, and it's just going to rain and snow and freeze and drop all that moisture on the other side of the Earth. So the question is, if that happens, and we are doing this documentary because we see the sciences which are telling us that yes, it not only has happened, it has happened repeatedly and on a regular time basis. But if that happens, what can we do about it? Well, the good news is that the historical record and the archaeological record shows that the last time it happened, people survived. And the time before that, if we go back, we can only go back 60,000 years in carbon dating, but it looks like previous civilization before that, there were survivors. The mythological record, the historical record, every single creation story that I've come across, and I've looked at a lot of them all across the world, point to the fact that there are survivors. But there are very few survivors. So we need to ask ourselves, how did they get through it? And that will help us to get through it. So let's go back to the nova. So the sun novas. And when it does that, it takes about 7 to 8 minutes for the heat and the radiation to hit the Earth. However, if you remember, the sun is covered by a dust shell in between us and the sun. And when the sun novas, it's going to send all of that dust and debris headed out in all directions. Remember, it's a sphere. You have to think of it as three-dimensional. And when it does, all that dust shell, which is also a sphere, around it, it's going to blow all of that dirt and dust and everything just as fast as it can. One estimate, and I'll start putting links to the science on the page, but one estimate is that that dust shell is going to reach the Earth in about 17 to 18 hours. Traveling at a speed of about 2,000 miles per second. Now, put that into context. If you were able to, and you got on a plane in San Francisco, and you were traveling 2,000 miles per second, you would hit the East Coast in 1.5 seconds. That's how fast it's coming. And so there's a lot of force behind it. There's a lot of cosmic particles coming this way as well. And that explains a lot of the tectites that we find all over the Earth. Those tectites, unlike volcanic tectites, which tectite is just a glass bead. When you have one that's formed volcanically, it has gas bubbles in it. You can see that. But these tectites that they're finding on the Earth, on the Moon, on Mars, NASA's gone and taken soil samples of the Moon and Mars. These do not have air bubbles in them. And because it's on all the planets, and what it looks like is that they were splattered on the surface of the Moon and Mars. The reason they had to go there is because, especially the Moon, they had to go to somewhere that wasn't at the mercy of wind and water and erosion. And so if it ever happened there, that would be readily available to pick up. And that's what they found. They found these glass beads with no air bubbles in them, but they had fissures in them, meaning kind of like if you took a drill and you were able to drill holes through it, which was caused by the cosmic rays that were going through it. So that's going to hit the Earth. And when it does, it's going to, in and of itself, create a lot of heat and fires. And if you go back to the mythological record, we see that multiple times it is recorded in those mythological catastrophe or creation myths, one or the other, that the moon turns red, or it turns to blood. And that's found in the Babylonian, the Sumerian, the Jewish, the Mayan, and the Nordic mythological record. All of them say the same thing. Each of them may be a little bit different because of their vantage point from around the Earth when it happens, but that's what caused that. Because all of those hot, speeding particles of dust, dirt, and debris just coating whatever was facing the sun at that particular time.
So the last supernova is spewed out an almost unimaginable amount of wreckage, interstellar dust and fire onto the Earth. Not just the Earth either, just everywhere. It was all over the universe. And so you have the Earth covered in hot molten rock. And when it cools, it crusts over, but inside continues to boil and bubble. Periodically, water vapor breaks through the crust and crystals form. When holding a crystal, it could be as old as the universe itself. And the oldest rocks formed, or the oldest rocks found on Earth, are over 4 billion years old. And the molten lava is 1,816 miles thick. So you can imagine the Earth is always making crystals, you know. And most crystals spring from the center of the Earth. It all depends on the shift of the plates. You know, the plates could shift and another pocket opens. You know, chemical-rich fluids flow through the newly created spaces. Perfect ingredients for making crystals. Crystals form when liquids cool or freeze into a solid. Now there are 4 ways crystals are created. Hydrothermal. Gemstones are formed when bodies of mineral-rich water cool. You have igneous, which is the cooling magma. Metamorphic, time and heat and pressure. Sedimentary, worn, washed away. I mean, they go through rivers, they tumble down mountains, they go through the whole process again.
So again, you think about the catastrophic events that are going on. We're talking about burning on one side of the Earth. We're talking about freezing, instantaneous freezing, and ice sheets being created on the other side of the Earth. We're talking about massive earthquakes as the tectonic plates are shifting with either rotation or a shift of the rotation of the Earth. We're talking about floods, gigantic floods that cover pretty much all land. Again, going back to the mythological record, every one of them talks about that. We're talking about magnetic storms as the magnetosphere and the relationship between the electromagnetic forces of the sun and the Earth get activated, you'll see lightning storms unlike anything ever seen before. So to be someone on the Earth's surface at the time that this is happening, your chances of survival are extremely low. This is why previous civilizations had to go underground. And it was during this time, the last time in the 12,000 year cycle, that this happened, when all the caves were made. When all the petroglyphs, as they saw these things going on in the sky, they recorded them on stone. They were forced underground. But now, after these events come to an end, even if there are tens of thousands or 100,000 survivors that made it through that particular event, what they're going to face is now a land that is completely unrecognizable. One that is void of most floral and fauna, food sources, or they may be in an area where now there are thousands of feet of glaciers, and the world to them would be unrecognizable. At the same time, there is a theory that is going on, and this also is supported by the mythological record. And this is from Babylonian, Sumerian, Egyptian, Jewish, Mayan, Vedic, and Nordic traditions, that at that time the sun darkens, meaning it no longer gives off its visible light spectrum. Oh, it can still give off, UV rays, gamma rays, radiation, and it can still heat the galaxy. But according to those mythological traditions, the sun goes dark. Another reason why man had to be forced underground. And we know, again, from the geological record, that there's been a lot of glaciation on the Earth. We know that the Midwest was covered in ice, still covered in ice, if you ask me, all the times I've been up there. Excuse me. Additionally, on the West Coast, state of Washington, it is estimated that the ice sheet was as much as 4,000 feet high there. And they know that because of the compaction rate of the soil there. Tommy and I live in Red Feather Lakes, Colorado. And we're in a great spot because we're above where the glaciers were, but it's literally a 12-mile drive for us to go down and find glaciated granite or evidence of glaciers here. And Tom Peden, whom you've already seen in the first video, said that it's estimated that the glaciers here were 1,000 feet. But keep in mind, Tommy and I are at the 8,500 foot level. Okay, that would bring them where you see the glaciated granites about the 7,000 foot level. Tom Peden's a little bit lower than that. And you can see where those glaciers were and were not. So Tommy and I are really in a good spot because we're above where the glaciation was, at least the last time. Okay. Also, while the tectonic plates are moving about, what you're talking about is the tectonic plates pushing up against each other, rubbing against each other, moving away from each other. That's the three different kinds of tectonic plates: convergent, divergent, and transform. And so that's going to mean, of course, obviously, earthquakes in one place after another, just everywhere, absolutely everywhere. But at the same time, you're going to see an awful lot of volcanic activity going on, particularly around where those tectonic plates meet. But there could be new tectonic plates. Again, remember that they estimate that the lithosphere, the crust of the Earth, is about 70 miles deep before you hit the mantle, the lava. So there's a possibility that some of those tectonic plates could crack, can form new areas of volcanic activity. And we know of earthquake activity in recent recorded history, where if you had an earthquake in one part of a continent, say it happened in New York, which oddly enough had an earthquake last month, it was felt all the way. It could be not this one, but it could be felt all the way to San Francisco or down into South America. So if that's happening with the small, and even if we're talking a 12 point earthquake here, that's nothing compared to what we're talking about here with the catastrophe. But the point is that those continental plates could reform. Okay, we'll get into a study of the tectonic plates, which is going to take a little bit of time. And we're going to look at it with a viewpoint of this event happening. And when we do that, you're going to see how it is that anyone who survived, any civilization who survived, was driven underground possibly for 400 to 700 years, and then came out, would not even recognize where it is that they were. So let me just touch a little bit on some of the historical record. As an example, we know that you can find petroglyphs, cave paintings, petroglyphs, all over the world. We know that they go back tens of thousands of years. But the interesting thing is, if you study the petroglyphs, you'll come to realize that they're very common. That is to say, you will find the same petroglyphs in all different places around the earth. In particular, just off the top of my head, the sun spiral, the stick man with the 2 dots, so forth. You will find these. What that is indicative of is that they had a shared experience. They all saw the same thing. Obviously, this could not have been something that was local, that they each independently drew. The similarities are too close. It had to have been something from the sky, something that they all could see. And when they did that, when they saw it, they all felt that it was important enough to record by whatever means they possibly could, so that they could have a record of it. And so again, you'll find these petroglyphs very similar all across the world. The other thing that I find interesting, and I think I had said in the previous video, when I'm up at night and I can't sleep, and I research a wide variety of topics. One of them is crop circles. And I invite everyone, if you get a chance, just look up sun-related crop circles. In particular, I think what you're going to find is you're going to find evidence of a yin-yang pattern, which is a clear indication of a reversal of some kind, again dating back to ancient archaeology and mythical records. But what I could not believe is how many crop circles that are sun related show this kind of rotation that I'm talking about. And whether it's talking about the sun or talking about the earth, there seems to be a common theme. So I invite any of you that are into that, go back and look at them again. You know, I mean, I've always been fascinated with the phenomena for decades, but it wasn't until just recently, after I started putting all this together, that I went back and looked at them again. And it was like I was looking at them with new eyes. It was just astounding to me how many of them were related to this subject.
So this is like perfect for me, because I've had a lot of alien experiences, and if you know of Mother Shipton, here's a little piece from Mother Shipton you should hear. For those who live this century through in fear and trembling, this shall do. Flee to the mountains and the dens, to bog and forest wild fens. For storms will rage and oceans roar when Gabriel stands on sea and shore. And as he blows his wondrous horn, old worlds die and new be born. A fiery dragon will cross the sky 6 times before the earth shall die. Mankind will tremble and frighten before the 6 heralds in this prophecy. For 7 days and 7 nights, man will watch this awesome sight. The tides will rise beyond their kin to bite away the shores, and then the mountains will begin to roar, and earthquakes split the plain to shore. And flooding waters rushing in will flood the lands with such a din that mankind cowers in muddy fen and snarls about his fellow men. He bares his teeth and fights and kills the secrets, food in secret hills, and ugly in his fear. He lies to kill martyrs, thieves, and spies. Man flees in terror from the floods and kills, and rapes and lies, and blood and spilling blood by mankind's hand will stain and bitter many lands. And when the dragon's tail is gone, man forgets and smiles and carries on to apply himself. Too late. Too late, for mankind has earned desert fate. His masked smile, his false grandeur, will serve the gods their anger stir, and they will send the dragon back to light the sky. His tail will crack upon the earth and rend the earth, and man shall flee, king, lord, and serf. But slowly they are routed out to seek diminishing waters, spout, and men will die of thirst before the oceans rise to mount to the shore. And lands will crack and rend anew. Do you think it's strange? Will it come true? And in some far off distant lands, some men, such a tiny band will have to leave their solid mount and span the earth. Those few to count. Who survives this, and then begin the human race again?
but not on land already there, but on ocean beds, stark, dry, and bare. Not every land on earth will sink, but these will wallow in stench and stink of rotting bodies of beast and man, of vegetation crisp on land. But the land that rises from the sea will be dry and clean and soft and free of mankind's dirt, and therefore be the source of man's new destiny. And those that live with ever fear the dragon's tail for many year, but time's erase memory, you think it's strange, but it will be. Land rising from the sea will be clean and free of all of these, and this is where the new civilizations will be started. Slowly the memory of the disasters will fade away as time passes, and fear will subside. And before the race is built anew, a silver serpent comes to view and spew out men of like unknown, to mingle with the earth, now grown cold from its heat, and these men can enlighten the minds of the future men, to intermingle and show them how to live and love, and thus endow the children with the second sight, a natural thing, so that they might grow graceful, humble, and when they do, the golden age will start anew. The arrival of the extraterrestrials and their spaceships, who will enlighten the men starting the new civilization. Children will be gifted in special mental powers, which becomes a naturally occurring phenomenon. Then the golden age of man will begin. The dragon's tail is but a sign for mankind's fall and man's decline. And before this prophecy is done, I shall be burned at the stake, at one. My body signed and my soul set free. You think I utter blasphemy? You're wrong. These things have come to me. This prophecy will come to be.
Odd tidbit. When the sun novas and the magnetosphere, which is already weak, is weakened to the point to where a rotation can happen, that is going to leave us exposed to all kinds of UV, cosmic, and gamma rays. Interestingly, all three of those are known to affect us at the DNA level. All three of them. So now my mind's going wild when I found that out. So now here's previous civilizations having been bombarded all of a sudden by these rays, and it affects them at the DNA level. And at some point I'll pull up one of the NASA scientific files that I found on this. What that means is that the possibility of us evolving from those civilizations is greatly increased. One, because of the exposure of our DNA to the rays, and two, because people survived, and so any of their children that were born afterwards would have carried those changes directly. And the one NASA paper that I'm thinking of off the top of my head, was written back in 1970, showed that while it didn't, that kind of circumstance would not affect the living entity, or the parents, it does affect in vitro, meaning that anything born after that would carry on those changes in the DNA. Alrighty, so I wanted to get a little into tectonic plates here for a minute. And again, what we're talking about is we're talking about the weakening of the magnetosphere. Then it is triggered by a supernova to where the crust of the Earth, the tectonic plates, are basically in freeload, while the core of the Earth resets itself and starts rotating in whichever direction it's going to be. Basically, there are two theories. One is that there is a complete reversal, meaning that rather than the Earth flowing, rotating from west to east as we know it now, will stop and then start rotating east to west as we know it now. The other theory is, and I tend to agree with this theory quite a bit, only because of the ice core samples and the sampling that they did up in the Arctic, where they found numerous layers, as many as 9 layers of tropical plants, that there is going to be a shift, and in particular a 90-degree shift. So what we're talking about is the two different theories. One is that there's a full rotation reversal, meaning that the Earth will, which is rotating west-east, will stop and then start rotating east to west. The other theory is that there's a shift in rotation. In other words, it could start rotating from any direction. It could be southwest to northeast. But I think there's good evidence that what we're looking at is probably a 90-degree shift. And I want to look at tectonic plates from both those theories. And if we do this, you'll get an understanding about how big of a catastrophe and how widespread we're talking about here. Okay, so this is a picture of tectonic plates. The dark black lines here are the edges of those tectonic plates. Here's the North American plate, here's the Australian plate, Eurasian plate, the Arabian plate, Indian plate, East Indian plate, African plate, so on, South American plate, so forth. And you'll notice that where these dark lines are, the edges of these plates, which are free floating on top of the mantle, that it has red arrows. And these red arrows are showing us the direction that these plates are moving right now, as we know. As an example, you'll see these two red arrows that are pointing towards each other. That means that here, this North American plate is pushing up against the Juan de Fuca plate. Okay, and that's what's called a convergent line. So they're pushing against each other. Here you see two arrows pointing away from each other, and this is the mid-Atlantic plate. What that means is that this plate is moving to the left, this plate is moving to the right, or actually the west and the east, which means they're separating. And as they're separating, these fault lines, plate lines, are filling up with new magma, volcanic activity. And they're filling in the gaps, so to speak. Over here at California, you'll notice that these two lines are moving left and right. And what that means is that these two plates are sliding together, and that's called the transform fault. So arrows spreading away from each other is a divergent fault. This is a transform fault. These are a converging fault. So if we wanted to get a better picture, trying to use Tommy's computer here.
Backwards, man.
Yeah. Get a better picture of what's going on here. Here is a divergent plate boundary, convergent plate boundary, a transform plate boundary. You'll notice here that some of those plates are covered with water, some of them are not. These are continental plates, these are oceanic plates. Okay, so here where you have a convergent plate, two boundaries that are pushing against each other, one side is oceanic, the other side is continental. You'll notice that the oceanic crust has a tendency to push underneath the continental crust. And the reason for that is because of the density. Think about it. This has air on top of it. This has water on top of it. So oceanic crust, oceanic boundary has a tendency to push under. So what that does is it lifts up this continental crust. Okay? Here we have a divergent plate boundary. That's where they're moving away from each other. And that's where I said it fills in with magma. And the reason is because that gives the mantle a chance to break through the lithosphere. And that is what's filling that in. Sometimes over here, it actually creates a hot spot, and that hot spot is what becomes a volcano. In this case, it's a shield volcano. Or excuse me, a stratovolcano. Here, it's a shield volcano. And this is Hawaii. This is a good example of Hawaii, the Philippine Islands. I say Filipino because I'm half Filipino. But you get an idea what we're talking about here. Where we have these plate boundaries is where you're going to have breakthrough of the mantle, and this is what is transforming the face of the earth as we know it. Okay, so quick review: convergent, the boundary plates are pushing against each other; divergent, they're moving away from each other; transform, they're sliding against each other. Okay, and a lot of them, most of them, are under the ocean. The rest are the rest are at where the ocean and the continents meet, and when they don't, when it goes right through a continent, it creates what's called a rift zone. That's where magma comes up, it heats up that area, that earth has a chance to fall down, and it creates what's called a rift valley. Okay, so let's look at this in the case of earthquakes. And I'm going to pull this one up here. Okay, see if you notice anything. This is a record of epicenters of earthquakes from 1963 to 1998. Do you notice anything familiar about it? What's familiar about it is you'll notice the epicenters are right along the edges of the continental plates. Okay, here's the Africa plate, here's the mid-Atlantic boundary. Here's California, down through Mexico, all the way down the west side of the Andes. This is the Nazca plate. You can see this is Alaska up here. These are all plate tectonic boundaries. Okay? So most of your earthquakes are found in that area. Here's the Ring of Fire right through here, going around the Pacific plate. And this is Australia, Indonesia, Africa, Eurasia, South America, North America, Greenland. My point is that if the majority of earthquakes around the world are found right along these tectonic plates, what's going to happen during a rotation, reversal, or a rotation shift. Okay, keep in mind, right now the Earth is moving from west to east. That means all of these plates here are being pushed on or pulled on west to east. So, if there is a polar reversal, now all of a sudden they're going to push east to west. Okay? And keep in mind, these aren't straight lines. Okay? So there's all kinds of places where this is going to break through. And that in itself is going to be bad, because if you have a rotation, slow down and stop going this direction, that's going to create a huge amount of earthquakes as these plates start bumping up against each other. But in a full reversal, it's going to go this direction too, so now you got it twofold going back through there. At the same time, all this Pacific Ocean water is going to be moving east to west, then it's going to stop, and then it's going to move, west to east, and then it's going to move east to west again. So again, you're talking about great flooding moving this direction, and then great flooding moving this direction. Okay? Keep in mind too, is where all these tectonic plate lines are, this is where you're going to find all your volcanic activity. And as that mantle breaks through, that we looked at here, as the mantle starts breaking through along those plates, you're going to just see volcanoes popping off one after another. Okay? Alright, so let's look at the plates again. I'm going to use a different map here. This is the one I had up. I want to go with this one. And I like this one because it's like something I would find in high school.
It is, okay? Totally.
Alright, so now, let's look at it the other way. Earth is rotating west to east. This is the equator right here. Okay? The temperate zone is 30 degrees each way. Tropic of Cancer, Tropic of Capricorn. Okay? That's the tropical areas. And all rotating this direction. If there is a 90-degree shift now all of a sudden you're, and where they, science says the north and south poles are moving towards, it's going to be somewhere here west of Chile. The other side's going to be somewhere here east, near Indonesia. Okay? That's a full 90-degree flip of the poles. And we'll get into the documentation on that. But, you know, it's just easier for me to tell you that's where they say it's going to be. Okay, so what that means then, if there's North Pole, South Pole over here now all of a sudden the rotation's going to be south to north. Go back to your tectonic plates. These have been pushing east to west for a long time. You change that direction, now all of a sudden it's going south to north. That means that these converging zones and these diverging zones here, the ones that were pushing against each other or separating, they're now becoming transform zones, meaning that they're going to slide rather than pushing on one another. Okay? So now, that gives the opportunity of, as I said before, the face of the Earth looking completely different than it ever did before. Fortunately, with the Pangea theory, which I do not have a map of here, but I'll put it up at some point, the Pangea theory shows that all of these continents, if you took them and you cut them out, they kind of work like a jigsaw puzzle. And you can put them together, like here's South America, here's Africa. You can take South America and you can slide it up over here to Africa. Okay, but you notice it's not a complete west-east fit. You have to take this and you have to twist it in order for it to get in there. Same thing with Australia. In order for it to meet up over here in Asia, you have to twist these continents in order for them to join up over here. So what does that tell us? That tells us that as it goes from west to east to a south to north rotation, over the period of time that it takes to do that, these plates aren't just going to start moving in the direction they're going to be. They're going to twist. They're going to rotate. Okay? That being the case, again, you're turning all these convergent and divergent boundaries into transform boundaries. Okay? And you're turning these transform boundaries into convergent and divergent boundaries. They're going to push in different directions on different continents. That would explain why in the Pangea theory you have to twist everything to fit. During that time, there's going to be a rotation of these continents, these continental plates as well. And that means more earthquakes, more volcanoes, and really when people come out from underneath the ground, which is where I hope they go, because that's where they're going to get protection from the elements and the cosmic rays and the UV light. When they come out, they're not going to recognize where they're at. Not to mention that theoretically this could be 400 to 700 years of an ice age. They're just not going to recognize where they're at. So if we get to that point, it's not going to be a matter of, oh yeah, I grew up down there, there's a stream of water down there. It's going to be gone. You don't even know if there's going to be a stream there. Or you say, oh yeah, I live down by the ocean. Well, truthfully, with the forces that we're talking about now, the oceans could rise. They can now be the new mountains. The mountains can lower. They can now be the new oceans. Another reason why I believe that this is going on is because when you look at mountain ranges in the world today, you notice almost all of them, except for over here, and I'll get to that in a second, here in the Himalayas, almost all of them go north to south. Here's the rock, here's the Sierra Nevadas. You know, I only lived there 42 years. Here's the Sierra Nevadas. Here's the Rockies where I'm at now. Here's the Appalachians over here. Here's the Andes over here. Okay. And then you got the Himalayas that, you know, diverge from that. If you go back over here to our earthquake one, you'll notice something interesting. That India, which is one of the oldest civilizations, seems to be, you know, we know they have a lot of earthquakes over here. It seems pretty clear. So the point of going over the tectonic plates is this. This is going to be unlike anything that humankind as we know it today has been through. If we go back to the historical mythological records, we go back to the civilizations previously, what we come to understand is that this is a complete cleaning of the slate, so to speak, which is horrendous, absolutely horrendous. But at the same time, it's a good thing. And it's a good thing because it gives us a chance to, one, evolve, two, start over again, and hopefully we've learned some things along the way. Things that we need to find a way to pass down to the next civilization. Like I said at the very beginning, what this theory does is it answers the three basic questions that everyone has asked. Where did we come from? We came from a previous civilization. Where are we going? We're going to the next civilization. And what is the meaning of life? It's the survival of life. We have to find a way to make that happen. Again, the good thing is there have been survivors before. And they have passed down through their oral traditions, their written traditions, their petroglyphs, cave paintings, their architecture. They have passed down a lot of this information for us so that we can be ready for it. And I believe that no matter what culture you come from, whether it be from a religious side or a scientific side, or what race you belong to, or what culture you come from, everything points to this. And it's designed that way so that we can prepare ourselves for the survival of life onto the next civilization. And let's stop there for a second.
Yeah.
I was going to get into something else and I can't remember what it was. Oh, yeah, no, let's keep it there.
All right,
you can cut that out, sorry.
Yeah, I'll cut it out.
What's that, cut it out?
I'll leave the coughs in there though.
I appreciate that. It's not like I have coronavirus, it's February.
Right, he don't drink Coronas, he drinks fucking Busch Lights. So
That's
fuck
right.
off.
Yep. What did Hutton say? If someone with coronavirus could find someone with Lyme disease, they'd have it set.
Oh, dude. On the beach.
Oh, okay. So what was I going to get into? Oh, yeah. Part of the documentary that we're going to be doing is looking at these ancient writings and looking at the archaeology, the geology, the architecture of these ancient civilizations so that we can see how, one, they knew about this and how they had left us monuments and instructions on what we're going to go through and how to survive it. And I'm really excited about getting into that part because that's my favorite type of science to research. So hopefully that'll be in episode 3. It may be in episode 6 or 7. It all depends on how much of the science that we can go through. Another reminder is that this is not my science. I am not a scientist. I don't go out and do scientific studies anymore. I did in the chemical industry, but I don't do that anymore. But I will be pointing you to those that have spent decades, their lives doing this science and their findings. And we'll put them into the links on the page, and that'll be just homework. I'm just going to give you what I remember off the top of my head, and hopefully through the documentary discussions that we're going to have with people, other interviews, will all come to a viable conclusion that we can use, because as the magnetosphere is weakening, as we see activity on the sun becoming more rampant, we're going to start seeing signs that we're headed this direction. And I believe that with the magnetosphere and the sun that we're seeing here, and the fact that we're at the end of that 12,000 year time period, that we're going to see it soon. And there's a lot of work to be done. And I can't do it all. You know, it's something that we're all going to have to come together and form an us culture to get this stuff done so that we can feel confident about the next civilization.